I do want to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our fourth session of our 10th Annual Citizens Planning Academy. For those of you who are just joining us, my name is Brittany Rothmeyer, and I'm the Executive Director of Fayette Alliance. So we're so proud to put on this event for the 10th year in a row, and are very excited to wrap up our keynote speaker and panelist sessions tonight with the Growing Our City session. This event really wouldn't be possible without our sponsors, so I just wanted to say a quick thank you to them. The Urban Land Institute Kentucky chapter, who sponsored our first session, Fayette County Farm Bureau, which sponsored our Promoting Our Farm session, Kentucky Bank, who sponsored our Lunch and Learn on Land Use and Equity earlier this afternoon, and Winter Quarter Farm, who has donated kindly a box to Keeneland for use by a lucky attendee who has perfect attendance at this year's Citizens Planning Academy. So we will draw tonight for that Keeneland box, and you'll be able to use that in the spring, since who knows if we'll be able to go to Keeneland in October. So we'll be in touch with you. So we really have had such an incredible group of people this year, and I just really want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your evening to spend more time on Zoom than I imagine you probably do during the day, and really become more engaged citizens of Fayette County. So Fayette Alliance is so proud to present this course, and I do want to give a quick overview about Fayette Alliance and what we do to those of you who may have missed out on our first three sessions, or if you're just joining us. So Fayette Alliance is a nonprofit land use advocacy organization. We are completely funded by donations from engaged citizens like each of you. We're dedicated to achieving sustainable growth in Lexington, Fayette County in three main ways. Land use advocacy. We work at City Hall and beyond to advocate for policies and laws to sustainably and equitably grow our city and preserve and promote our farms. The second way we achieve our mission is through research. We know that the question is not if we grow, it's how we grow. We focus on how we grow by working with experts to conduct research on the complex issues facing our community's development. And the third way we achieve our mission is through education, just like this. So Citizens Planning Academy is our premier educational offering. We really want our citizens to get involved and understand all of the issues that affect our community. We also have various in-person and obviously virtual events now happening on Zoom to hear from local experts on a variety of smart growth topics throughout the year. Through our programs, our newsletter, our social media, we want our community to understand how land use decisions impact our community's economic development, environment, and quality of life, as well as how to advocate for smart and equitable land use policy. So before I jump in, I do want to mention a few housekeeping items. Everyone is on mute, and we just ask that you please do stay on mute just for sound purposes for our panel and until you get into your breakout sessions later this evening. Any questions that you all have throughout the discussion that we have with our panelists tonight, please place in the chat at the bottom of your screen. One of our team members, one of our Fayette Alliance team members, will put a question, now ask questions here in the chat so everyone knows where to do that. And again, just as we have this conversation, please enter questions there and we will try to get to as many as we possibly can. What we've been doing is if we're not able to get to your question throughout the course of the session, we've been answering them after the fact, and we'll follow up with you all in an email tomorrow answering any of the questions that we don't get to this evening. Everyone should have received your packet of information for tonight that included the agenda, breakout session questions, term definitions, and resources. This really will help you guide or help guide you through the session this evening. So I highly recommend, if you're able to pull that up after our discussion tonight, would definitely also recommend that you go back and look through those resources. I think looking at some of those links that we tried to gather and provide to you all to provide even more context for this conversation are really, really helpful. If you have questions about some of the terms that you all hear tonight, go back to that email and look at the terms and definitions, because those might also help just give you a frame of reference as well as you continue to think about these issues going forward. So as a reminder, in our first three sessions, we discussed Planning 101, Promoting Our Farms, and Responsible Infrastructure. And today we'll be talking about Growing Our City. We'll start off hearing from our panelists, and then we'll have time for Q&A, and then last we'll go into breakout sessions where everyone will be broken up into random groups to further discuss what we heard about today. And just as a reminder, because of the interest in longer breakout sessions, we decided to add one additional session to Citizens Planning Academy this year. And that will be next Tuesday from 5:30 to 7 on Tuesday the 18th on Zoom. And that will be called Putting It All Together. So we really hope that you can join us. We completely understand if you can't, because that wasn't the original plan. But because of the time frames and everyone really enjoying the breakout sessions, we wanted to have one additional session where we talked about how all of these topics that we've covered this year wrap together, and then give you all additional time to talk in small groups with other engaged citizens in this community about what you learned and what you got from these sessions. So we absolutely recommend that you join us. Watch out for an email that will be coming on Monday with information for the Putting It All Together session next Tuesday, the 18th. So I do want to briefly frame our discussion tonight that we're going to have with our panelists. So I'm so happy you are able to join us. As I said before, and as we've really said throughout Citizens Planning Academy, the question that we face as a city is not if we grow, it's how we grow. So we at Fayette Alliance advocate for growing Lexington in an intentional, responsible, sustainable, and equitable way. Smart growth is a strategy which balances environmental protection, economic development, and social objectives to meet the needs of today without compromising quality of life for future generations. We want Lexington to be a strong, inclusive city. This means supporting, enacting, and changing policies so that they're sustainable for our future, that they're fiscally responsible, and that they ensure that all of our citizens can thrive in our community, especially those in marginalized communities who have been disproportionately impacted by our land use and zoning policies. Growing intentionally means providing affordable housing for our citizens, a diversity of housing options, making good infrastructure investments that promote walkable communities and accessibility to transit, and supporting a strong, diverse economy. Economics and research tells us that urban sprawl is expensive. It doesn't solve the problems that we face around housing affordability or supply. So we encourage, as we continue this conversation tonight, for you to think about how our city can make investments in our community that utilize existing infrastructure in our urban core and enact policies that can provide more housing options, prevent displacement, and better utilize our existing land. How do we focus on infill and redevelopment of our existing assets to better serve our own citizens? With continued smart and equitable growth, through intentional policies from our local leaders and engaged citizens like each of you here tonight, we can make strides to grow our city in a responsible way. So now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. We have Christopher Zimmerman, Kevin Atkins, and Shayla Lynch. Kevin is the Chief Development Officer with Lexington Fayette Urban County Government. Chris Zimmerman is the Vice President of Economic Development at Smart Growth America, a Washington, D.C. based land use advocacy organization. And Shayla Lynch is the Executive Director of Ampersand Sexual Violence Resource Center and co-chair of the Housing and Gentrification Subcommittee for the Mayor's Task Force on Racial Justice and Equality. So welcome, Kevin, Shayla, and Chris. We're so happy that you all could be here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Glad to have you and excited for this conversation that I know that we've had in this community and will continue to have as we navigate what smart growth means in our community. So this first question is really for each of you to answer, and take as much time, as you want to do this. So we know the question, like I've said, is if we grow and not how. In the face of two pandemics, both COVID and the longstanding pandemic of racism that has been brought to the forefront for so many, how do we grow our community in a responsible, equitable, and sustainable way? How have these pandemics changed the way that we think about responsible growth? And I will kick this question off and ask Chris if you could speak on that first to us.
So there are really two questions. The first part of it being, how do we grow the community in a responsible, equitable, sustainable way? And of course, I think the answer to that is smart growth. That's what smart growth is about. What does that mean? And that means that we have to, number one, use land efficiently, as opposed to treating it like it was free, but recognizing that it's actually a resource. And because we have essentially treated it as costless by heavily subsidizing, for instance, automobile travel, and by incentivizing development regardless of location, we've got all kinds of other consequences that follow from this that lead to a lack of sustainability in economic terms, and environmental terms, and fiscal terms, and other consequences that include the social consequences of increasing separation and segregation of our communities along both income and racial and ethnic lines. So, in the big broad answer is, I think that we have to have land use policies and the related government policies, include how we structure taxes and tax incentives and how we spend the government's money and locate government facilities and a range of things in a way that brings about a more efficient use of land, which generally means to say communities that are more compact, that where things are closer, where you don't absolutely have to get in the car to do absolutely everything, where you have more opportunities for people to be closer to where they work, to closer to where they go to school, to where they need to get groceries, to where they need to go to the doctor, for all those things. Those are the things we need to do to make our society in general more sustainable. And then we get into the question of, the impact of COVID. And there's a lot of ways you can address that, but I'll just give one example of the problem with the way we have been doing things that's pretty clear now. And, that's if you take the example of like how we're living now. And, we have a real kind of bifurcation right now in our society. And we have those who do jobs that are generally the more well remunerated jobs. People like me who can sit in their house, as I have been doing in my office here for the last 5 months. And, despite the fact that it's not the ideal way to live, and, I wouldn't buy other things equal necessarily have chosen this is basically good. Because for one thing, I can stay isolated and I can avoid exposure, to the danger that's out there. On the other hand, there's the other half, and, it's roughly half. People who have to go do all the things that make it possible for me to live here. And they're having to go out every day and do all the kinds of jobs that range from cleaning places to working in, medical facilities to delivering the goods that come to my front door and so on. And they're having to expose themselves all the time. Now that, and those are disproportionately people of lower income, they're disproportionately people of color. But this also relates to land use too, because as we've had the way we've developed communities over the last 50 or 60 years, those are also people who often have to travel a long distance in order to get to those jobs. And they don't necessarily have the luxury of automobiles for everybody in their household who does, which means they have to continue using public transportation, even as people are afraid that that is a source of risk, and more significantly, because with fewer riders, we've cut back, so it's even less convenient than it normally was for them. So the whole pattern of development and the way, parts of our community have been forced to live less, what is in normal times less convenient and is now arguably more dangerous, is a real inequity that is exacerbated by the way we have developed our communities and the pattern of housing and other aspects. So that's just one way in which I think COVID has impacted this issue. Brittany, your mute is on.
Thank you. You'd think by this point I'd be a master of that, alas. Kevin or Shayla, would either of you all like to speak to that question?
I'll let Shayla go, and then I'll come in.
Sure.
Thank you. I will say that the blessings of COVID, and I try to find the blessings of COVID these days, is that it has brought to light the true inequities that several of us have chosen to ignore over our lifetimes. And so now they are front and center in our face, and we can't ignore them anymore, which is a good thing. That's a blessing of COVID. And the housing disparity and the issues that Lexington is facing are very much in the forefront these days. And I think that in order for us to have the true community we desire, that everyone has to be at the table to decide what happens to everybody. It can't be a few folks deciding what happens to everybody and making those decisions. I think everyone, if you want true equity, everyone needs to be able to have a seat at the decision-making table and have a voice at that table and be given the same resources and tools to make those decisions so that everyone has a voice and an opportunity to decide how their community is shaped. And I think that we're primed. The ground is very fertile right now for everyone to have a seat at the table, because people that have been gatekeepers are moving over now because they see that they've been gatekeepers and they're being called out because of that. And I think that is awesome in making room for more voices of color to come into the conversation, whose voices have been silenced for so many years, to talk about how they want their neighborhoods, their communities to be policed, how they want them to grow, with how they want the housing to look like. There's so many factors that play in that. And so I think the ground is really fertile in this time of COVID, that true change can really happen. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it will be the consistent lifting up of voices and of people of color and residents in Lexington who are tired of being sick and tired every day, to talk about what sustainable, equitable growth in Lexington looks like and how that growth can benefit everybody. So I think one of the blessings of COVID, because I think there are many blessings of COVID, to be honest, but I think one of them is that it is bringing to light the true inequities in Lexington, and it's giving voice to those that maybe haven't had a chance to have that voice to talk about true and lasting solutions. And our mayor is right there, open and ready, which is, an elected position that has not always been open to the whole community, but we have a mayor now who is, which is great. So I think that the blessing of COVID is that we can talk about what our community should look like, talk about the inequities in our neighborhoods and how things are zoned, and talk about true fixes for these issues that will be sustainable for our community.
Absolutely. And something we talked about at our luncheon earlier today was how, obviously we talk about how important local policy is. And Chris was saying too, in looking at cities all over the country, it's really the grassroots conversations that happen about local change. These local policies, are so important. And like you said, it's really having everyone at the table to talk about what those policies should be and how those policies should change. That's such the key part of it. So I completely agree. I think it's definitely an opportunity for this community to change in that direction. Kevin, what about you?
Well, I'm going to kind of pick up where Shayla just left off. From the government standpoint, I mean, we're like every other city around the country. We're still trying to determine and feel what the final outcome of COVID will be and kind of where we are. I think one of the things we know that will not change is the demand for housing in this community. Now, the question is, how do we make sure we accommodate affordable housing, but also from an economic development standpoint, affordable housing is important, but also the phrase affordable housing affordability. I'll be able to get it out in just a minute. I've been in council meetings all day, so I'm sorry. But that's what's, both of those phrases are important when we're talking to economic development clients, because we're not only talking about the CEO home, we're talking about that staffer that's just getting their career started in some fashion with the company. And it's the question that comes up just about every time somebody's in, which is, what is the cost of your housing? So no matter who you are, it is important to economic development. In doing that, I think we have to remain being creative. We have got the nation's first urban services boundary is in this community, and it was done at the right time and for all the right reasons. And it has protected us from the sprawl that some communities probably have. And it does cost I mean, people often think development doesn't cost money. Well, development does cost money, and it's not typically money, especially on housing, as important as housing is. That's not cost that's really recovered, at least in a short period of time. And if you look in Kentucky, most of the property taxes you pay goes to the school system, an important cause, but they're not the ones paying for the infrastructure in most cases. So, you know, one of the other things we're doing, and this is a point Shayla was just making, we're trying to take a look at what may be outdated as far as our zoning regulations. Do we have exclusionary policies that in some ways have created barriers to making sure we can provide the housing that we need that's both responsible, equitable, and important as well, sustainable? And Brittany, you're aware, I'm not sure how much everybody else on here has paid attention. The mayor's also involved in a group that's called the Sustainable Growth Committee. So we're taking a look. Every 5 years, Lexington has to do a comprehensive plan. So we're taking a look for the next one. What are the, and it was originally called the Triggers Committee. So what are the triggers to, how do you go about making sure that you have the data you need? So if that boundary is expanded, and let's face it, it will be expanded at some point in time. It's been 20 years. But if you do expand it, what are the right data points to make sure you're making the right decisions and that you're making them not only is it time, but where should that occur? So being smart, using data to help you lead is another way we're trying to go.
Absolutely. And you know, and following that work and our work too, it's always, I think, you know, as we look at the objective approach, you know, what does the data show that, you know, what are the trends? What are our development trends? What are our needs? You know, how much housing do we need? Are all important questions, as well as, you know, our social questions, like equity. And a little bit, you know, to what you were just talking about, Kevin. Chris, I was wondering if you could talk to us about the fiscal aspects of what smart growth means. You know, as communities navigate budget deficits and funds allocated for affordable housing, what can you talk to us a little bit about what the financial and economic and fiscal aspects of what smart growth is in a community, and how we grow in a fiscally responsible way for the future?
Yeah, one of the costs of sprawl, as identified in a study that was called The Costs of Sprawl, almost, well, 5 decades ago now, more than 40 years ago, is the fiscal aspect of this. The fact that as we developed in this, you know, new prescribed way under the zoning adopted in the mid-20th century, where we separated uses and we made everything dependent upon automobile access, that and essentially low density spreading out around our various cities, that came with a significant increase in, you could say, per taxpayer cost for all the things that the government has to do, but in particular for those aspects that are driven by some aspect of geography, and that's not insignificant. The most obvious thing is the road itself, of course, and you know, it's significant to have to pave those and maintain them and all that. But there's also all the government services that go under the road, like we deliver water, we take water back, we have stormwater and that sort of thing. We have utility services that run under there, and then other things go on top of the road. You know, we have to send fire vehicles, fire service vehicles out. We have to send police cars around. We have to pick up school children in buses. We have to pick up trash, and all those various things add up, and they turn out to be significantly more expensive when you're serving a whole range of low density communities at the ends of cul-de-sacs. And yet we never, although we've known this for a long time, we haven't incorporated any of that thinking into the decision-making processes in governments for the most part. We commission fiscal impact studies all the time for, if we do this new thing, or if we look at this new plan, what's that going to mean? And we generally figure, on, well, we'll have this many more, people are expected because we are going to grow, and there's going to be employment, and those folks will bring revenue with them because, we'll get tax revenue as a result. and they'll add to the cost of government, and we usually just use an average cost estimate. But the thing is, it doesn't cost the same to deliver these services everywhere. And so, we've been modeling this for the last half dozen years or so now for communities all around the country, big and small. And, the pattern is pretty much the same, whether you're talking about a city of 1 million people or a town of a few thousand people. The magnitudes of numbers are different, but the pattern is the same, which is that to the extent that you use this more dispersed pattern, you're going to have higher costs. And we find that much of that development is not, does not pay for itself. That you wind up getting a new development that brings in less revenue than the cost of providing services to those folks. In fact, one of the things that people, will make folks uncomfortable and surprise a lot of people in a lot of communities. Many places we go, people who live in a nice suburban community, suburban in character, in that single family homes and higher income and all that, assume that their high taxes are paying for the city and subsidizing those folks downtown. And when we run the numbers, we almost always find it's the other way around. We did some recent work, for instance, in a city in Michigan, and found that when we looked at 67 different neighborhoods, basically in the whole city, that some of the lowest income places were net positives in taxes, and some of the wealthy single family neighborhoods were negative. And that's, essentially a reflection of the inefficiency of the pattern. But the way we charge for things doesn't reflect that. So if you get water, for instance, from the city, you generally pay based on usage. So it's based on gallons, and it's an average charge. But it doesn't cost the same to deliver that water to every household in town. And, we don't price things to reflect that. In general, we don't price taxes that way. So, we've built into our system this inefficiency and this incentive, which encourages more of that kind of development. In many places, when we're talking about whether you have a formal urban growth boundary or not, are you annexing as a way of expanding your tax base? In many communities, they assume that's a good thing. In many places, it's turned out it isn't, that you're actually acquiring places that are going to ultimately cost more to serve than the places you already have, and you're going to be subsidizing from in to out. So we need to start looking at these aspects of our development patterns a lot more closely and building in those considerations into what we approve, what we encourage, what we subsidize, what we incentivize in various ways.
And as we talk about the cost of development, in communities, we also think about the investments that we're making in communities in our urban core, and how do we ensure that the investments that are being made in communities to provide housing and services and things like that are generating benefits that are felt by the citizens that currently exist in those communities. And in that light, Shayla, could you talk to us a little bit about your work and your role on the Housing and Gentrification Subcommittee for the Mayor's Task Force for Racial Justice and Equality? I imagine that you all are talking about these issues, and how do we, make policies to ensure that we can have investment and provide housing and things like that without displacement, and about what programs and initiatives are working towards housing justice and affordability for all of our citizens.
Well, our specific work with the subcommittee is really, we're looking at housing experiences through the lens of African Americans in Lexington, and looking at the systems that have disenfranchised and denied access to African Americans in regards to how they live in Lexington. And so we're looking at the neighborhoods that have specifically been hit hard by gentrification. And we're looking at the causes and seeing if we can append those systems in order to make housing a little bit more equitable and just better for African Americans living in Lexington. So in looking at the work that the Neighborhoods and Transition Task Force has already done, which I spent a year with them, and they did a lot of great work. So looking at that data, and then also collecting our own data. And also we did a survey, which we sent out to the entire community, specifically though, focusing on the neighborhoods that have been have suffered from gentrification the most here in Lexington, trying to get feedback from residents about what their housing experience has been living in Lexington over the years. Has their neighborhoods changed? Have they noticed that the rates of their neighbors have changed? Has the commercial businesses in their neighborhoods changed? Can they afford to shop in those retail businesses? And so we sought to get feedback from the community, and we've gotten quite a bit of it, and we're still combing through all of those surveys and all the research and articles that folks are sending to us. But our goal is to basically provide to the mayor some action steps. We have some immediate action steps that we want the mayor and the city council to take a hold of immediately and to take some action on immediately. And then we have some other action steps that will have to, of course, be rolled out and changes implemented over time. But we're looking for, and I think this is what the mayor has tasked with what can we propose to her and the city council about how the city can correct some of the missteps that have happened over the years in regards to African Americans living in Lexington, in regards specifically to their housing. So we're making proposals about what the city can do to make some of those changes. We're referencing some of the programs and organizations that do exist that are working on this issue already. The Lexington Fair Housing Council, where I used to work, and I'll give them a good shout out, is doing some great work right now in providing relief to renters, or helping them, not providing relief yet because the money's not there yet, but helping them to get a hand in that relief when that money is available, because there is, I got an email from Art Crosby, the executive director today. The amount of back rent that residents in Lexington own right now is astronomical. And it's going to be a true housing crisis when the moratorium is lifted and landlords are able to file for evictions based on non-payment of rent. It's going to be quite scary. And so the Fair Housing Council is doing some really good grassroots work and trying to work with not only renters, but also landlords to try to prevent those evictions that are coming, because they are coming. It's just really any day now. The Lexington Community Land Trust is a phenomenal organization that's headed by Russ Barclay, that has kind of like changed the whole scope of what it means to be a homeowner and how to involve the community in a cooperative way. And I love the work they're doing to make housing not only affordable, but also include the voices of the community members that are in that housing to be at the table to make decisions about that housing, about the neighborhood, and about that community. So they're doing great work. Also, the Urban League here in Lexington, as well as Habitat, of course, for Humanity, are actively providing affordable housing opportunities for citizens of color all over Lexington, which is phenomenal. So there are some organizations here in town that are doing great work, and we just need more dollars, more people at the table to continue to make sure that equity is there and present at every level. But it's been a big task that the subcommittee that we've had, and I'm very excited about the work that we're doing. I'm excited about the proposals we're going to send to the mayor and the city council very, very shortly. That date haunts me on my calendar every day as we are starting to work on our written report now. But I'm very excited about what we're going to propose. As I said, some short-term action steps, some very, very long-term. It's going to just take some time. It's going to take a real cooperative effort amongst several facets of this community to make that change, because the African Americans have suffered in this community in regards to housing. They've suffered, they've been displaced, they've lost housing, they've been gentrified. So it's going to take some time to correct those wrongs. But I think if not only this administration, but the administrations to come commit to doing this work, I think real change can be had and it can be sustainable.
Absolutely. Thank you. And you know, I absolutely commend you for the work that you are doing on the task force too, because, you know, these are hard, long-standing questions that you all are addressing. And, you know, like you said, I think there are short-term things to do, and there are very long-term things to do. And we as a community have to put in that work. And these questions are difficult to address. So I commend you all for the hard work that you're putting in on beginning to answer these questions. In addition to, I know that you spoke about rents and evictions, and what are some of the other barriers that you all have seen in your work on the task force, or getting feedback from community members? And kind of going back to that, I think getting people's voices at the table, like you said, getting the communities that are being the most affected, getting their voices at the table is a piece of this. But what other barriers have you seen in trying to get this information, and then trying to strive for equity in housing and community development?
Well, there's COVID. So you can't really go door to door, because if we were in a different situation, I would be going door to that survey to get completed so we can get as much feedback as possible. So that has been a barrier. Money is always a barrier, because those that do good work are always looking for more money to help us do the good work. So funding is always a barrier that nonprofits daily try to overcome and try to make it work, no matter how we can, because we believe in our mission and our passion for service to our constituents. And I think just getting the information out there, it's hard to reach everybody. And you can have town halls at local schools. You can do Zoom calls that are streamed via YouTube. You can have your different preachers and pastors in the different churches espousing what's going on from their pulpits each Sunday, but it's still hard to reach everybody. There are language barriers. So it's just hard to reach everybody and get the knowledge and information out there, because there are resources available in the community that can help folks that are dealing with housing issues. But it's just being able to get that information out is sometimes very, very hard. You try to go through as many channels as you can to get the resources to the people that need it the most, but sometimes it can still be a stumbling block there. So we're just trying to fight through it every day and be creative, especially during this climate, about how we can continue to reach folks, let them know that there are some resources out there available, and that all hope isn't lost right now.
Absolutely. Kevin, if you could speak a little bit to, as our community and as our city works to implement infill and redevelopment as our growth strategy, and a part of that is promoting housing diversity and promoting housing affordability. How is the city working to make sure that our planning policies and our policies around infill and redevelopment, to make sure that they're equitable and ensure that they benefit, that they have benefits for all members of our community?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, for example, is the effort that's underway right now. The council started hearing about it today. It's a planning term called floor area ratio. And basically what that means, because I will tell you, I looked at our planners and I said, will you speak English to me? It just means how much of your lot can you actually build out on? We had a project earlier this year that one of our council members brought to us. It was an older home. The owner just wanted to tear down the back porch, was one of the really old, small, screened in back porches, and just extend the kitchen out a little bit. And it presented a problem because it then exceeded by adding 100 square feet onto a house, exceeded the floor area ratio. So taking a look at those things. One of the things we just started as of July 1 is we have partnered with both the Urban League and Ed Homes, and they have come in as one of our economic development partners for the next 2-year cycle. What their charge is for that period is to really dive into our opportunity zone, which is essentially Midland over to about Red Mile, and comes down Main Street kind of as the border out to kind of around where Lexmark is. The goal we've given them is what will make that zone work. But what we added to that was, it's not only about the opportunity zone, it's about taking what the work of the neighborhoods in transition has been doing, and how do we incorporate that? So in that zone, which some of these zones have attracted some good housing, affordable housing projects. But how do we make sure that we're creating or helping, not create, but helping an area have the jobs they want, have the housing they want, have the amenities they want, so they can also have, that neighborhood can also have the live, work, play right there with them that so many neighborhoods want, and in some cases around Lexington have gotten, where you can walk to work, you can walk to the park. I mean, you can walk to the grocery, you can do a number of things. We partnered probably 3 or 4 years ago now with the development along Midland Avenue. So there's affordable housing in the Met project. There's affordable housing dollars. There's tax credit dollars at the federal level. There's some local TIF dollars. And that project is a mixture of affordable housing, market rate housing, and retail on the first floor. So it's just looking for a way through regulation at the planning level, things like parking requirements. Do you always need X amount of spaces for every development? We had a developer who was on a affordable housing project come in not long ago saying, you can't apply the same numbers to all projects. And that's, the staff is taking a look at that. If you don't have those requirements, you don't have as much payment, you're bringing the price of the overall project down some, which allows hopefully the rents to be a little bit less. So we're looking at regulation, we're looking at partnerships throughout the community to kind of help us address those issues.
That's great, Kevin. Thank you. And I think not only asking these questions like we do in these community forums, but also I think, for our community to hear and be informed about the ongoing projects, because sometimes, it is as the city moves along in this work, I think sometimes it's easy for people, not to have all the knowledge of all these programs that they are actively doing. So, there's certainly so many good things going on around these issues, like Shayla was speaking to, that I think it is so important to remember these initiatives that are ongoing and that have been implemented, and ongoing projects that we're working on that are really working towards some solutions around these issues. So thank you for sharing that with us as well. As we've talked about today, and as Chris touched on earlier, Lexington, as well as cities across the country, both large and small, with growth boundaries, without growth boundaries, are facing very similar questions about growth, about budget deficits, infrastructure investments, housing affordability, and economic development. Chris, could you speak to some policies that you've seen in other cities that have been or can be utilized to promote smart and equitable growth?
Well, there are a range of different kinds of things reflecting the range of different areas that need to be addressed. So, we talked about zoning and things like parking requirements, as Kevin was just referring to. A lot of places have been re-examining their zoning codes that basically promoted, very singular types of development. Single family homes each on its own lot, spread all over the place. And, those can be great, and people want to live that way, that's fine. But we sort of gave them little other choice in most of what we've been building. And then we sort of had the contrast between that and maybe some big apartment building, which maybe somebody doesn't want. There's a whole lot in between. And so there's a lot of, interest now in what my friend Dan Perola calls missing middle housing, which is basically a whole lot of different stuff that we used to build before we had, the modern ways of doing things and with zoning and the way we finance them and all that. And for which there clearly seems to be a demand, because where they exist, they're highly prized. So, we're talking about kind of in between density stuff. So things that might be duplexes, triplexes, row houses in places where there aren't any of those, smaller apartment buildings, a whole range of different things, accessory dwelling units, mostly made illegal by zoning codes adopted in most places. So enabling some of that through reforms of zoning is one aspect of trying to get at that a number of communities are trying. Changing from the separation of use-based zoning that we mostly have in place to more form-based zoning can help to encourage by making it easier for people to build the kind of communities that people want to live in, and simplifying the approval process, and taking at least some of that risk out of it for developers who might build the things we want to see is another. And I think it varies by community, but almost every city can look at the way they do things and ask, do our goals aligned with the practices we have? So if we're giving some kind of subsidy because we want to attract jobs, are we doing that in a way that reflects the objectives we have? If you give a subsidy to companies that come in that say they'll provide jobs anywhere, whether it's downtown or somewhere out by the highway, well, then you're adding to the problem. You need to focus your incentives on the development where you want to get it, because if you start thinking about what's it going to cost me to serve that development long term, that should guide where you incentivize. When you're thinking about what you do as a government yourself, and this is another thing that not enough communities have thought about, but some are beginning to think about. If I say, well, where's the cheapest land so I can save the taxpayers money? I get one result, but I may wind up with something that actually farther away, so harder to serve, harder to get people there, and more significantly, doesn't add value to anything else. Whereas if you can co-locate it with other activities, you'll bring some value to private investment. For instance, a branch library in my community, when I was an official here in Virginia, we had a branch library that was basically a place you would drive to and take the kids or whatever, get your books, and drive away. And a developer was looking at a mixed-use development down the road a ways and said, we're interested in doing this, but we were going to rebuild the library. And the question was to rebuild it in place, or they said, put it over here and put it in our development and we'll do a land deal so you can put it there. And the reason they wanted it there was because they wanted more demand for the restaurants and other businesses that they would have there. And they felt that everything they did would be enhanced by having the public library there, which we did, and that worked out very well. That's not the kind of thing that typically has been thought of. It's mostly just a matter of where can I get land and do it inexpensively. But actually, the choices over where we spend government money and put government facilities can have quite an impact on overall values, and it can boost, that land around that library produces a lot more tax revenue now than it did before, which of course helps pay for the library and everything else.
Absolutely, and kind of in line with the economic development aspect, Kevin, economic development obviously and jobs are key for Lexington's success. Considering that the majority of our city revenue does come from payroll taxes. Can you speak to our city's existing strategy for economic development and how it's changed in the face of the impacts of COVID-19?
Sure. I think, we're like most economic development people. The market is shifting, and we're going to have to determine exactly how far. 63% of Lexington's budget is based either on payroll or net profit. So you can see the impact to jobs and profitable companies that has. One of the big shifts I think we've seen, and since March especially, but people don't notice that it's been the fastest growing trend within economic development over the last several years, is the remote worker. Now, it's been forced on us due to COVID, but it was already growing rapidly on its own prior to COVID. How do we attract those remote workers? Those are the folks that can work from anywhere. So they could be working for a company in Los Angeles, but be housed right here in Lexington, because that, the marketability of housing that is attractive to most people relative to what East and West Coast housing may cause, the quality of life here, those type of things. So I think we have to look at that. What is our strategy going to be on development? Because none of us really knows yet. You've seen some studies where in the short term, commercial real estate will be good because everybody's having to social distance. But what will be the impact if the remote worker stays? And then what will we be doing with a lot of the commercial buildings we have now. Some of our local developers have even said, you know, some of our buildings would actually still make good residential. They could be converted over fairly easily. I mean, you look at City Hall, which was a hotel until about 50 years ago when the Urban County government merged. The City Hall was put in there. It was never meant to be long-term, and 50 years later, we're still using it as a office building. So, I mean, we're just going to have to, Brittany, the honest answer is we're going to have to look at the trends and see where they take us. We're one of our other new economic development partners, Aaron Persley, who is with Euphrates International, has done this for years, and he is helping us come up with the new strategy. And so we're going to be working toward it.
Thank you. I had the opportunity to meet with Aaron and really excited to hear about his strategy and vision for how we can grow as far as economic development goes here in Lexington. So I am going to go to the chat. We've got some great questions from the group, and I am going to switch over here now. So there is a question on the argument that U.S. cities have passed the true cost of growth and development to future generations, and that now the bill is due for the community, and now we're facing the consequences of passing the buck a little bit. And I think that when we talk about how do we grow smartly and responsibly with the future in mind, takes this into consideration. But do you all have any thoughts about that idea that we have this person referred to as a growth Ponzi scheme, but that does pass the true cost of development to future generations, and how do we address that and prevent today's generation from passing it to the next, and how that intertwines with planning for smart growth in the future? Don't everyone jump at once.
I was trying not to always go first, but I certainly have an opinion.
Sure.
I'd say, that I think I understand where the questioner is coming from. And I'd have to say that this is something where practice varies a lot. So you look around the country, and fiscal practices locally are really very different from place to place, in part because state laws about what municipalities can do are different. And the fiscal environment, the fiscal culture is different. So, in some places, like I'd say here in Virginia where I live, governments have always been very cautious about borrowing and investing. So we haven't had some of the kinds of problems. We have other kinds of problems, often underinvesting. But compared to some places where, there really is a lot of kind of betting on the come, and, really fiscally unsound practices, that varies a lot. On the other hand, on a national and state level, but really on a national level, I'd say the biggest example is the way we've funded particularly transportation infrastructure, because we have just had a system in place for 7 or so decades now, where we hand money by formula to states, where all they really have to do is say, they've done a few things, they have this study, this is what they need, get your check, and we fund 80 to 90% of the costs of adding more and more on to a highway system that it's harder and harder to maintain, and which in many cases has not done what we set out to do. And that every project's going to increase safety and reduce congestion. The congestion tends to get worse, and safety we don't go back and check. So we don't actually look to see if we improve safety by expanding the highway. In the meantime, we've actually destroyed a lot of value with many of those investments. I mean, obviously we need highways, and some of them are good, but we've tended to just, put them in all over the place because the money is so cheap. Because if you're at the local level, the state level, how do you not take that? And so that's the solution that gets pushed to the top, and we evaluate them based on essentially outdated modes. We now have the ability to measure what kind of accessibility, what connections we improve with any kind of improvement or transportation change. We can measure that kind of thing now. You couldn't do that in the 1950s when they developed most of these methods. So they just looked at flow. And so we spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the effort to improve the flow of traffic, which doesn't necessarily actually solve the problems people are trying to solve. And in the course of doing so, we destroy a lot of real estate value all around those roads because the more you put a barrier in between two places, the more you push things away from each other, the less you have the benefits of agglomeration, which are really the key to the value of a city in the first place. So, I think because we are at a time right now of thinking about the next big infrastructure package, which may not come this year, but probably will come next year, it's more vital than ever to think about, how does this investment actually help us in the long term, as opposed to recreating some of the problems we're experiencing right now.
And Chris,
Told you I had an opinion.
yeah, Chris, I would just chime in. It's not only about the cost you incur when you put the infrastructure in. The biggest, most costly project in the city's history is still ongoing. It's called the EPA consent decree, because for years, due to our growth, and growth done right is good. I'm not complaining about growth. It's part of being a vibrant city. But because we didn't invest in maintaining the original infrastructure, guess what? You're now putting about $700 million at last report into redoing old infrastructure. Anybody that's been down Euclid Avenue of late will see some experience with that. So it's not only the cost up front, but it's the maintenance cost and the cost of replacement in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we say fix it first.
And that, I think, is the exact example of why we want to be so intentional about how we do it now and make investments in our infrastructure that we can benefit from for years to come. A question for Shayla and for Kevin as well. How do we cultivate developers in Lexington, in our community, who are willing to build to an innovative bar rather than to the very minimum when they design neighborhoods, when they're trying to determine what types of housing and what types of mixes of housing and commercial corridors and areas that are walkable to residential areas? So how do we create targeted incentives that will bring developers that think innovatively to the table?
Shayla, you want to jump in first?
I'm trying to think what a question. A lot of developers are rich and white. So creating opportunities for other communities of color, other individuals that maybe don't have the capital to lead that investment, but have the ideas, maybe putting some financial feet to that through programs or funding to bring some other folks and some more diverse voices to the table, maybe will create some lasting change. Because I read a comment today that was submitted to our subcommittee from a community member, which he blatantly said, yeah, all the investors that I see in my neighborhood are rich and white. And the people that they're building for are rich and white. And so our community of color is decreasing in my neighborhood. And so opportunities for other folks to come to the table, giving funding, an opportunity to other innovators and investors that aren't rich and white, maybe to level the playing field a little bit, that maybe can bring some of that innovation that is needed, so that the bare minimum isn't just built in some of these neighborhoods.
And I think, that's one of the advantages of programs like the Opportunity Zone. That doesn't really cost, if we're successful there, that doesn't cost the city. Those are federal kind of incentives. Now, the question that we have posed is what kind of assistance can we do at the local level to maybe put those projects over the top so you can get some of those new investors interested in putting money into some of the areas in the city that maybe we have neglected for a while, or who actually just need that extra little push. If you look at our unemployment rates, they're somewhat misleading, because we've got pockets of the city that still are over 13, 14% unemployment historically. so that, trying to put jobs into those areas. People may have barriers. If you don't, driving to work's not a problem unless you don't have a car. And, we don't, while Lextran does a good job, it's not able to serve the entire community. They just don't have the resources to do that. So how do we create those environments where people can have a job they want and it's close by? And especially to me, in those areas where we have historically seen higher rates than we would want.
Well, I'd just like to add to that, that's an example of the cost of the unfortunate pattern of development we've encouraged for the most part in the country over the last 5 or 6 decades. So we've pushed both people where they live out and where they work out. And so they're harder to serve by public transportation. That becomes more expensive. And then we say, well, we can't afford that. So the service then has to be less frequent, which means that people who can choose don't do that. And now there's fewer riders, and we have this downward spiral. To the end, what we have is minimal service that is there for the people who have no other choice. And that was the pattern all across the country. If we get more employment located, in a more compact, concentrated fashion, and we have more people living in communities that are themselves walkable, we're going to have places that are easier to serve efficiently with public transportation, and a significant share of the population will be able to do so, and will choose to do so, because we have seen in recent decades that if you provide decent public transportation, there are lots of people who will choose to do that rather than drive. And there is a big chunk of our population that doesn't have the option of driving, but has to get somebody else to drive them if there's no way around. So again, the transportation issue is really a land use issue.
And one of the things we've talked with Ed and PG about is, as far as, and this is that partnership on neighborhoods in transition and the opportunity zone. If long term we want to take a look at maybe being creative and having an incentive where we create one that, okay, you qualify, but to really qualify, you're going to have to agree to hire people within a certain radius of where you're going to locate. So we incentivize people to go in to areas where the jobs are needed, but you've done it in a way through this effort that it's jobs, it's housing that community wants, which is the most important thing, which hopefully helps address the gentrification issue to some degree, but lets people who have long lived in that community, invested in their homes, invested in their community, their neighborhood, their neighbors, to stay right where they are and be able to afford to stay right where they are.
And Kevin, that leads into another question that was asked about data around opportunity zones and how opportunity zones have affected long-term residents of the neighborhoods they're in. Is there more displacement? Are prices of homes going up? Who's benefiting from those investments? And I think your point answers that a little bit. But how do you put policies in that do protect those neighborhoods to a certain degree from displacement while we're encouraging investments? How do we make sure that the people aren't displaced and that people in that community are benefiting from that investment?
Well, the Opportunity Zone program is so new, and Chris may have seen something that I haven't seen. There's not really a whole lot of data yet on impact. And so there have been some projects done, not as many as I think most people would have wanted. How do we address that? I think the way we've looked at addressing it is not trying to recreate the wheel, which is take the work of the Neighborhoods and Transition Committee that's already been working, I think, close to 2 years. And Shayla's shaking her head, so my time frame is about right. And put that with this so that you end up with a better product at the end of the day that those neighborhoods within that zone can be happy with, proud of, and make it work for them.
I'd say that based on our work, and we're doing research on opportunity zones right now, actually, when we have a program on opportunity zone academies, speaking to some people in Norfolk later this week, as a matter of fact. But to start with, I'd say, Kevin's point is right, which is it's pretty new. So one of the things that's lacking is data. We don't know how much the impact is, in part because a lot of these things haven't happened yet. So they may have an impact, positive, negative, maybe both, but you wouldn't know yet anyway. Data is a problem because when the law was enacted, it did not require, it required basically nothing in the way of reporting. So even doing research is hard to find out what's going on what is potentially very significant action. I would say that our work so far suggests that, number one, the impact has been not as profound as people who liked it or didn't like it might have thought. Not as much money went to it initially. There's some reason to think that since March and COVID that there may have been more movement in that direction. But there are a lot of projects. I mean, there are some significant things happening. They tend to be heavily real estate. One of the hopes was that money would also go into, for instance, promoting businesses. There's been less of that. I would say that, you know, the initial indications are on the community development side may not be doing what a lot of people, you know, had thought that it might do. It's still early to tell, but I mean, the preliminary indications to me are, you know, I'm not sure it's achieving some of the goals that had been hoped for.
I'm actually, I've been tasked with, our subcommittee wants to learn more about opportunity zones. So I've been working with the speaker to have our subcommittee meeting this week. So that's hopefully something we'll be talking about more at our subcommittee meeting this week as well.
I mute myself here. How does tax incentive funding come into play with equitable development?
Well, from my perspective, you know, and we talked a little bit about the MET project earlier. If you can help through incentives to bring the overall cost down, theoretically, it relieve some of that pressure on price points that, you know, it should make things more affordable. I mean, we try to do these things in concert with, like, the Affordable Housing Fund, work with some folks on tax credits. So, you know, anything you can do to help relieve the overall cost of the project, make it more affordable for the entity doing the project, you hopefully, and many times you do it through agreement, build in a more affordable housing base. The MET is, I hate to keep using that, but they've got built in that a certain percentage of the apartments have to be affordable. Most of our affordable housing projects, you know, obviously because of the name of the program, have that same thing built in. So, you know, that's how you do it. I mean, you invest to get the result, hopefully, that you want.
We used a variety of methods. Like anybody in the country, you know, the low-income tax credit, the federal low-income tax credit, is the most important source of capital for committed affordable housing. You know, and to address the question one of the folks wrote in, that means, in this case, those affordable to those under 60% of area median income. And, you know, sometimes it would be targeted lower than that, but basically it's for households of low moderate income, defined as up to 60% area median income. And we leverage that with additional funds, in particular local funds, to create bridge financing and a lot of the preliminary things, you know, acquiring property, taking down the property in the first place, and so on before you do long-term financing. A lot of that, you know, around housing is a financing issue. And so the local government can facilitate that. And I'd say in my local government, we got good at that. We got good at helping nonprofit housing providers go through the process to get the approval at the state level, where it basically is to be able to win tax credits and then have the financing package put together. And so, you know, if you're intentional about that and, you know, comprehensive, you can over time create quite a portfolio. And by the time I left office, about 15% of the rental stock of the county, which is more than half the housing stock, is committed affordable housing. But it's a combination of these things layering on. Sometimes we combine historic tax credits with low income tax credits with some local funding as well as private financing. But you have to work with folks to make that possible, because it's very complex, and it's for a lot of the providers that can be a difficult thing. But as you get good at this over time, you can, as I said, build quite a portfolio.
And we've always in Lexington used a good portion of our CDBG allocation every year toward housing as well. Just again, to make Chris's point, layering on to what can help work.
But I also add to that, we look for other ways too, right? Because we're still behind it. We're still losing. If we look at the amount of market rate housing that is going away, that is to say, prices are going up, so you're losing those. Even as we added all these units, we knew we were losing the whole stock. So, we had to crank it up, and my county's still struggling with that as land values here continue to rise. But we found additional ways. So for when a place is really hot, capture some of that value. We use value capture strategies to do various kinds of things in this country, often to build something we want to build. But you can capture the value to put into housing affordability too. You can use the tax increment financing district, not just to finance something. And in some states, they use it to give money to the employment they want to attract, which I think is a bad practice. But you can use that strategy to then, take some of the increase in the value of the property to go back into the community where it's rising, to compensate for the impacts that it would otherwise have on residents and businesses of low and moderate income. And if you combine all, there's not one thing. You need to get a whole array of tools and deploy them in a way that a piece here and a piece there will get you more housing that's affordable in more places, so that you can continue to be, if you're a thriving, prosperous place where values are going to go up, you continue to be a place that can have people of all incomes living there.
And Brittany, I mean, we looked at this last year. We had somebody who was transitioning out of the military that was a data person. So one of the things we had her look at, and I'm going to a point that Chris just made, Lexington is not unique in this way. Every urban area around the country deals with this. Probably those that aren't urban areas, but I mean, we looked at the urban areas, and I'm going to go somewhere I started. A lot of the criticism of the urban services boundary here is put on that it increases our housing costs. What we found was, and we benchmark against the leadership visit cities that the chamber has. Our housing costs are right in line with every urban city that we went to. So we're not unique. I mean, these are problems that every city our size and above is dealing with.
No, I think that's a great point, Kevin, because there was a question, about the comment about the boundary expansion being inevitable. And I think that, as we, that's an important point to make, I think, because I think many people think that expanding the boundary will automatically just mean that our housing cost goes down, which data has shown, it is not the case, just economically is not the case, that we are on par with other cities of our size. Shayla, I wanted to see if you could speak to how, you talked before about a lot of the barriers around the conversations that we're having about underserved Black and Brown communities being disproportionately affected by this housing crisis. How do people get a seat at the table in these conversations? How, if one of the people on the call today or a citizen has a question about, how do I get more involved in advocating and making my voice heard as it relates to those issues, do you have any recommendations for how, the best way that someone could begin to do that?
Speak up. Do you know who your counselor person is that represents your district? Do you know what their phone number is and who their legislative aide is? Have you ever been in contact with them? Have you sent them an email? You have to speak up and take action. That's the best advice I can give you, because the world and life is going to continue going around you, you know, unless you make a dent in it yourself. And so I encourage everyone in here to speak up and talk to who represents you at a local level and on a federal level as well. They have emails, they have phones as well. Make your voice heard and be persistent, because you're gonna get that canned email response when you speak, when you reach out to your elected representative. The canned response, but you gotta keep pressing. You have to keep pressing in order for change to occur. So continue to speak up, attend meetings. Another blessing of COVID is that all these meetings are online now and are streamed and are more available than they were before, it seems. And so you can watch these meetings. A local group, Civic Lex, is phenomenal about making a lot of the information that happens with our local government very digestible for Joe Q Public. I spoke with Richard Young today, who's in charge of Civic Lex, about the city's budget. He went over the budget in another meeting I was in today. So like just taking advantage of the resources, because we do have several resources if you want to get involved here at the local level. You don't necessarily have to run for office, but you can make your voice be heard. Just showing up at committee meetings and viewing them, you know, as they occur. And then if there are issues that concern you, I'm sure you're not the only one that feels that way. You know, there's power in numbers when it comes to making change in your communities. So just be willing to be that voice. And sometimes it feels vulnerable, like you're the only voice out there standing by yourself. Keep speaking up, keep shouting, because I guarantee you someone's hearing you. So just keep fighting.
Thank you. I think that that's so important to remember, and we'll put some resources in the chat as well as in our follow-up email tomorrow about, you know, if you don't know who your council person is, how you can find that information out, and some other resources as well. So, you know, this is, you know, why we do these community conversations, to offer opportunities for these more conversations to happen, not only with our local experts, national experts, but with each other. So on that note, we are going to go into our breakout sessions. And to all of our speakers, to Kevin, to Chris, to Shayla, thank you all so much for spending your evening with us. We're so grateful that you are involved in our communities, that you work really hard to shape and grow this community, and we're really grateful. Chris, thank you for coming to us all the way through Zoom from out of state. And for your work on the national level as it relates to smart growth. We're fortunate. You know, we believe that growing smartly, equitably, and inclusively is the best thing for our community, and we really appreciate the conversation. So
thank you,
so
Brittany.
thanks to our speakers.
And just let me say thank you for what you do, because you're trying to do on a local level what we're trying to promote on a national level. And I believe the most important work happens there on the local level. So what you're doing is great, and it's really encouraging for me to see. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you so much. So for now, and our speakers, you all are free to go. If you'd like to join breakout rooms, we'll be doing that momentarily. But for all of our citizens here tonight, we'll do breakout rooms, so you all can look to your breakout session discussion questions that were on your email and your resource guide that got sent out last night. So I encourage you all to have some great conversations with your fellow Citizens Planning Academy attendees. Then we will come back to this screen, we'll join back together again, and we will do a final closing. If you could choose a discussion leader in your breakout sessions, and as you answer those questions, have assigned someone to take notes. If you could please send those to info@FayetteAlliance.com. We'll put that information in the chat box. We'd love to compile your information from your breakout sessions and provide that to the group in our follow-up email tomorrow. It's been so interesting and I think really impactful to see what everyone's been talking about in their breakout groups. So for all of those of you who have been sending in notes, we really appreciate it. The breakout sessions just got put in the chat. And again, if you could have someone take notes and send the notes to us at info@FayetteAlliance.com, we greatly appreciate it. So enjoy your breakout discussions, and I'll see you back here in a little over 10 minutes, and we will wrap up and send you on your way. So again, thank you so much to our speakers, Kevin, Shayla, and Chris. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and enjoy your breakout sessions. We'll see you back here shortly. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for being flexible at the time. I know we're keeping you all a little bit over, but we did feel like it was important for you all to break out and talk to each other. So we will now conclude our 2020 Citizens Planning Academy. Again, just as a reminder for all of those who can join us next week, we have added on an additional session of CPA called Putting It All Together. So next Tuesday, if you can join us from 5:30 to 7, we'll be doing a brief recap of each of our sessions and then providing substantial time for breakout sessions on each of those topics. So we've heard from so many people that you all really wanted more time in the breakout sessions to digest what you learned and talk with each other about it. So we're hopeful that we can offer that and that will be of a great value to all of you. So we'd love for you to please fill out the 4-question survey on this week's session that we will send out in an email to you tomorrow. And in addition to the survey, it will have answers to as many of the questions as we can answer that did not get answered in our chat today. So thank you all for joining us for hopefully what was a very valuable discussion. We really could talk about growing our city all night or itself for 4 weeks. And we know that it's a lot of information to put into a really small time frame. So I appreciate all of your patience and understanding, and I do hope that it was a great conversation for all of us. So again, please fill out that survey that you'll receive in your email tomorrow, and this will allow us to ensure that we create an inclusive and welcoming space for everybody. So if each of your breakout sessions note taker could please email notes for your discussion to info@fayettealliance.com. We would really appreciate it. Thank you all so much for your time and open discussion, and we look forward to connecting with all of you hopefully next week and in the future at future online and in-person programming once it's safe to do it again. So again, we look forward to talking to anyone who can join us next week. We'll be doing a recap of each of our sessions and allowing ample time for breakout. So again, thank you for joining us tonight and for the past 4 weeks. It's been a great conversation and really enjoyed getting to see all of you and engage in these conversations in a virtual format. So if you can't join us next week but would like to stay in touch with our materials and everything, please reach out to us and let us know. You can write to info@fayettealliance.com. If you cannot make it next week, but would like to see the presentation recap, I'll be doing a presentation on each of the weeks, and we can make that available to you. We'll also make it available on our Fayette Alliance website. The Fayette Alliance website will actually house all of the resources and information from each of your sessions. It will all be in one place, so I highly recommend that you all check that out on our website. Sign up for our general newsletter if you don't already receive that, if you're not already on that list. And also please consider if you're able to make a donation to Fayette Alliance. We are a nonprofit that depends on donations from citizens like you, and we'd love if you could pay it forward to the next group of Citizens Planning Academy attendees. So enable them to attend and us to continue doing our work in Fayette County and in this community and advocating for smart, responsible, and equitable growth. So thank you all again. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. And I hope that many of you can join us next Tuesday for Putting It All Together. Have a great night, everybody.